Hey guys, Julie here, and in this video we are going to play with this homemade paper. It's actually cotton watercolor paper that I made myself about 3 years ago, maybe even longer. So this is paper where I incorporated some really old newspaper from the 50s. My dad's a construction worker and he found it in the walls of one of the places he was renovating. It kind of disintegrated after we took it out of the wall. I kept it in a box for a little while, and when I pulled it out again, it was like in pieces. So I decided it would be cool to incorporate some of the pieces into this paper along with some dried flowers. And speaking of old newspaper and dried flowers, I'm also working on another DIY project. So a video's on its way of making homemade beads, bracelets, necklaces, things like that. And I actually rolled up some paper beads here using the old newspaper from the 50s. Ignore my super dry hands. And I also glued some onto a clay bead that I made. Yeah, so pretty cool. Anyways, if you're interested in that, it should come out eventually. I guess an update for you and why it's taking me a bit longer to make videos. I actually started a new job, and it's an on-call job, but so far I'm working 4 to 5 days a week, so just about full-time hours, and I'm still trying to find my footing. I'm still trying to get used to the routine as well. So hopefully once I'm a bit more settled, I'll be able to get into a routine where I can post videos every week. Anyways, I also made some white paper, and I actually uploaded a YouTube short making a bookmark out of this. So I'll show you the bookmark later, how it turned out, and of course I used watercolor on it. The reason why I'm not going to show you it at the start is because I want it to be kind of a surprise. How this paper still handles watercolor today, whether or not it does. This paper is super stiff. Like, I'm holding it by the edge here, and so super stiff, especially a longer piece of paper like this. It's not supposed to be this stiff. So it's been about 3.5 years, and the paper does not smell bad. It doesn't smell weird. There's no like weird mold growing on it, unlike my handmade inks, which did end up growing mold. I had to throw them out. And if you want to see that video, I also made a 3 years later video on my handmade inks. I'll link that down below. But without the gelatin sizing, it would have been like painting on a piece of paper napkin. It would have just soaked everything up, and it just was not a pleasant experience. So this paper actually had 2 passes of the gelatin. The second pass was with alum or aluminum sulfite, and then this one only had the 1 pass. But I'd say they're both equally as stiff. This one is just a lot more rough. It almost feels like cardboard. Actually, they both kind of feel like cardboard, like cardstock, super thick. I wanted to use the piece with the flower. I want to see what it's like to paint on top of it. So the sizing is over top of the flower, so I wonder if this section here and also this section, this is like coming off actually. I wonder if it'll actually handle the watercolor, or I don't know if it'll even show on top of it. I guess we'll find out. As you can see, this paper is super textured. There's no chance that I'd be able to just sketch directly onto it and be able to create like a coherent piece that way. No chance. I have to use paint. I have to. There's no other way. I think acrylic would work really nicely on this, especially with all of the elements shining through. Watercolor might be a little bit tough. It could be because of the cotton, more cotton incorporated into this paper, or the fact that this paper only had 1 layer of sizing, but I feel like the white works a lot better with watercolors than the brown. Although, I only ever tested it after I made it 3.5 years ago. Like normally, as an artist, you tell your supplies what to do. You're in control, but in this case, the paper is very much in control. And the paper is informing me what I can and can't make. And this is also within my limited skills as a proud amateur artist, very amateur. Back in 2020, I made homemade botanical inks out of random shrubs, leaves, and berries I found in the Great Vancouver outdoors, namely Ambleside Beach in North Vancouver. They were very fun to experiment with, and to this day are my favorite art supply to DIY. Then I went off to South Korea for a couple of years. Learned, taught, literally, since I was a teacher. Said many hellos and just as many goodbyes. Fell in love and got my heart broken. It was a roller coaster. The first thing I did when I got back home was I went through every single item I owned and purged my space, aka my bedroom in my parents' home. Hello, Vancouver real estate crisis. Ha. Think aggressive Marie Kondo. An oxymoron, I know. During the process, I came to rediscover all of my art supplies. I didn't think my collection was very extensive, but being able to bring just a few cherished arty items with me to Korea, then coming back home to my full roster of supplies was almost overwhelming. That's when I really realized I was living in excess. And of course, that feeling wasn't just limited to my art supplies. It was everything. Shoes, jackets, shirts, books. Anyways, I have a video in the works about excessive art supply collections, which I will save for another day, perhaps even next week. Wink. The focus of this video is my collection of homemade art supplies. For context, before I left for Korea, I began experimenting with making my own art supplies. The focus of this video is my collection of homemade art supplies. For context, before I left for Korea, not only did I make DIY inks, but I began with making a few different homemade art supplies. It was a very interesting and revealing process. The items I decided to DIY were pigment powder, crayons, watercolors, and le pièce de résistance, watercolor paper, specifically cotton watercolor paper. Okay, I know this doesn't seem like such a big deal, but I was hardly able to find any info on DIY cotton paper making, so I'm pretty proud that I managed to make a few sheets. I documented the whole process, which I'll link below, along with videos of other art supplies I made myself. Making art supplies, ironically, helped me to appreciate store-bought art supplies for their formulas and consistency, since my homemade stuff doesn't even hold a candle to anything made with a machine. But on the flip side, I also learned to appreciate handmade supplies for the time, effort, and love that's put into them. It takes a lot of work and a ton more experimenting. It can feel almost impossible to achieve consistent results, unless you're very diligent in keeping track of measurements and ingredients. This has never been my style of working. I enjoy making a mess of things, and I just lack the patience to really perfect any of my art supply recipes, if you will. This is the reason why I can't stand baking, but I love to cook. Cooking just feels a lot more free and intuitive, and you don't have to deal with perfecting certain ratios. Anyways, despite me not entirely loving the process of art supply making, you have to admit, it is a super cool brag to say that you made the things you use to make art with. I am very proud of the experimenting I've done in the past, but if I'm being honest, I haven't been super driven to continue this saga. In fact, the process of making DIY art supplies feels a wee bit tedious right now. I did buy a bunch of glass dropper containers from Amazon to make more inks, so I probably will make some more in the near future, probably during the summer. But for now, there are just some other arty things I want to focus on. Long story short, I'm not going to force it. I'm going to go along with the ebbs and flows of pursuing art as a hobby, and the many layers and emotions that come with it. In this video, for nostalgia and curiosity's sake, I'd like to revisit my DIY watercolor paper, which has been sitting under my bed for over 3 years. Finding it again brought back memories of that summer a few years ago, being outside with my parents, having my dad help me make a paper making mold and decal, having my mom fish out a massive container large enough to make these big sheets of paper, and just enjoying a beautiful day in July here in BC. Reminiscing aside, paper making was one heck of a process. It took a lot of effort, all to end up with super lumpy paper. But the end result does also share elements of store-bought watercolor paper, which I'll touch on in a bit. I made 2 kinds, one with only 15% cotton and the rest made up of recycled paper and flowers, and the second is about 80% cotton and completely white. Both types of paper are heavily textured. It's nearly impossible to sketch on. And I also found that watercolor was quite a bit difficult to use on it. They absorbed onto the paper great, they blended out well also, but I found that my paper just didn't do the colors justice. It kinda dulled them out a bit. The recycled paper was much worse when it came to handling watercolors. I attempted to draw and paint a few chili peppers, but it didn't end well at all. The watercolors I put down lacked value, no matter how much I tried to incorporate it. So I ended up lining the peppers with ink, going over the whole painting with some colored pencils, and then attempting to save the hot mess with some gouache. It was such a painstakingly frustrating process that led to an ugly piece of art, if I'm being frank. So I decided to pivot entirely and use gouache to paint a Pinterest photo I found of some lemons. This worked out much better, and I'm actually really happy with this piece. Something about the yellow on top of the brown scrapbook looking paper just makes them stand out very nicely. Aside from the heavy texture, the paper was fairly easy to work with when it came to gouache. Next, I moved on to the white cotton paper. As far as my memories served, this paper was a lot easier to work with when it came to watercolors. So I found another Pinterest image, this time of a bunch of grapes. Reference photos are linked below as always, FYI. I found that the watercolors absorbed nicely into the paper, but again, the hues were quite muted. I wasn't able to fully encapsulate the vibrancy and subtle shifts in colors that were evident in the reference. I wasn't able to do it justice. When I first made these sheets of paper, I really blamed myself for not being a good enough artist to work with such a difficult supply. But now that I have a couple of more years under my belt, I know that it takes a long time to really find art supplies that work for you. Not just the medium itself, but the specific palettes and paintbrushes and paints. I don't feel like fighting my art supplies anymore. I don't have the energy for it. And that's the thing with DIY art supplies. I find myself constantly fighting with them. I want to tell my supplies what to do, and I want them to comply. I don't want them to dictate what styles I paint in or what subjects I decide to recreate. Did I originally care to paint produce on this day? No, I didn't. But I figured it would be simple enough to do on the paper I had to work with. I think this is a big reason of why I'm phasing out this DIY art supply saga. I'm simply tired. I did make some bookmarks with the white cotton paper that turned out pretty good, and I made them using watercolors, so maybe that's what I'll end up using the remaining sheets for. Just simple, small-scaled artwork. So what's next? Well, earlier I alluded to bringing homemade inks back. Actually, during autumn, when I returned from Korea, I collected some materials for more ink making. I wasn't feeling cooking them up at the time, literally. So I stuck the dye materials in my freezer. They've been sitting frozen ever since, so I guess that would be next in terms of DIY supply making. But overall, I think I'm just gonna focus on getting better at the things I enjoy painting, which right now has been portraits. Just like myself, this channel will grow and change as time goes on. in many different ways and in many different directions. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you will continue to do so as time goes on. Until the next one, happy experimenting, and as always, stay creative.